No conflict in the Star Trek universe has been as brutal as the Dominion War. Early in the conflict between the Dominion and the Alpha Quadrant powers, the Dominion starships had a unique tactical advantage over Alpha Quadrant forces such as the Federation and the Klingons. While this was due to the type of weapons used, the starship designs of the Dominion's Jem'Hadar warrior race also served as combat-capable warships that made light work of any vessels they typically faced. In today's Star Trek Explained video, we dive into the Dominion's Jem'Hadar fleet in the Star Trek universe. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. Like always, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then hit that subscribe button. Now, which of these Dominion ships in this video would you take into battle? The bug fighter, the battleship, or the battle cruiser? Comment down below. Okay, engage. Today's Star Trek video is brought to you by Trek Central's partner website, the Cargo Bay. This is your ultimate destination for Star Trek merchandise, like the brand new Nacelle Company action figures, featuring Sulu, Jellicoe, Tuvix, and more. The Cargo Bay also has a range of Star Trek themed PC accessories, like Klingon keyboards, mousepads, and even limited edition Star Trek Starship models. If you're into Star Trek collectibles, head to the Cargo Bay via the link in the description, and start exploring. Right, let's get back to Trek. The Jem'Hadar fighter was designed with the shipwrights of the Dominion, the greatest empire of the Gamma Quadrant, sometime before the 2370s. Next to nothing about their production and development history is known, but they were named for and primarily operated by the Jem'Hadar, the Dominion's warrior species. The Jem'Hadar were a purpose-bred soldier race, tough and devoted, and they lived their entire lives in service to the Dominion's founders. Their battle tactics were highly aggressive and sometimes even suicidal, often relying on overwhelming force. In space, the forces of the Dominion operate according to similar doctrines, and the Jem'Hadar fighter was designed in accordance with this mentality. Much like the Jem'Hadar themselves, Jem'Hadar fighters weren't built for survivability. They were designed for sheer aggressive firepower, and they were meant to be deployed in large numbers. In battle, Dominion fleets would unleash swarms of Jem'Hadar fighters, overwhelming the enemy and softening them up for larger vessels to finish up. While the Dominion did have larger cruisers in its fleet, the Jem'Hadar fighter was by far its most common attack ship, and these nimble craft made up the bulk of the Dominion armada. As you'd expect from an attack fighter, the Jem'Hadar fighter was quite small, relatively speaking. According to the Deep Space Nine technical manual, it measured just 68.32 meters in length, with a beam of 70.02 meters and a height of 18.32 meters, and it also had a mass of 2,450 metric tons. The ship had a scarab-like design, divided into distinct abdomen and thorax sections. The abdomen was located at the aft end of the ship and divided into two subsections, an upper section which resembled a pair of folded wings with a trench between them, and a lower section which was smaller and teardrop shaped. The thorax consisted of a blocky head at the front of the fighter and a pair of thin wings splayed out on the side which carried the fighter's warp nacelles. The Jem'Hadar fighter possessed deflector shields, like most starships. These shields were known to be the weakest at the ship's dorsal field junction. While the shields of a Jem'Hadar fighter could only take a few hits from a larger ship before collapsing, leaving the fighter easier to destroy, they did have the added benefit of insulating their craft from tractor beam locks. As of the 2370s, the technology that made this possible was unknown to the Federation. On top of these advanced shield systems, the Jem'Hadar fighter had transporter systems capable of piercing the shields of enemy vessels, allowing the Jem'Hadar to deploy boarders to enemy ships without having to wear down their shields first. The sensors aboard the Jem'Hadar fighters were also capable of picking up cloaked starships, thanks to the use of anti-proton beams and long-range tachyon scanners. Jem'Hadar fighters were propelled by a single aft-based impulse system, as well as an array of ion-based maneuvering jets. The fighter had a high thrust-to-mass ratio, making it faster at impulse than most larger vessels, and it was also exceptionally maneuverable, able to fly in circles around most cruisers. Only Federation runabouts could outfly a Jem'Hadar fighter, and they came with far less firepower. The tips of the Jem'Hadar fighter's wings featured a pair of small, blade-like warp nacelles, which were tipped with buzzard collectors and had a distinctive lavender glow. The fighter's warp systems was powered by a matter-antimatter reactor and allowed the ship to reach a top warp speed of warp 9.6. Jem'Hadar fighters were capable of atmospheric flight as well as space flight, although they couldn't fight in planetary atmospheres, and they were capable of landing on planetary surfaces. Grounded Jem'Hadar fighters were boarded via a large access hatch at the far aft of the ship, providing access to the ship's interior. Speaking of the interior, this was incredibly sparse and compact. Jem'Hadar fighters had no cargo bays and no infirmary, and what rooms they did have lacked food replicators, chairs, or even bunks for the crew, as the Jem'Hadar didn't need to sleep. The only creature comforts the crew of a Jem'Hadar fighter had were life support systems and artificial gravity. As on most starships, the most important room aboard the Jem'Hadar fighter was the bridge. This was located at the aft end of the ship's thorax. The bridge of the Jem'Hadar ships bore very little resemblance to those of Starfleet vessels, or even most alien ships. It had no view screen or captain's chair, and while crew stations ringed the ship's walls, they all faced inwards, towards a central dais where the ship's commanding officers stood. In place of a view screen, the ship's commanding officer and executive officer wore virtual sensor displays, headsets that beamed images of the space around the fighter directly into their brains, allowing them to see outside of the ship. Those unfamiliar with the technology found this effect uncomfortable and even headache-inducing. These control headsets could also be used to directly access the fighter's comm systems, allowing the ship's commanders to relay orders to the crew. Jem'Hadar fighters typically carried a total of 42 Jem'Hadar and a single Vorta, a mix of the ship's flight crew and embarked troops. In theory, a skeleton crew of 12 was all that was needed to fully operate a Jem'Hadar fighter. Each Jem'Hadar's first, the highest ranking of all the Jem'Hadar aboard the ship, served as the vessel's first officer, while the sole Vorta field supervisor aboard the ship served as the fighter's captain. The Vorta supervisor and the Jem'Hadar first were both typically stationed on the bridge, where they made use of the ship's control headsets. With such a small craft, Jem'Hadar fighters were actually pretty heavily armed, ordinarily boasting 3-phase Palarm beam emitters and torpedo launchers. The fighter's beam weapons were its primary offensive option. The main beam emitter was located at the bow of the ship, while an aft emitter was mounted just above the ship's boarding ramp. When the Federation first encountered the Jem'Hadar, the phased Palarm beams these weapons fired could penetrate most shields, giving Jem'Hadar fighters a significant tactical advantage over most Alpha Quadrant ships. A handful of Jem'Hadar fighters could easily destroy even the largest and most powerful Starfleet vessels, as the destruction of the Galaxy-class USS Odyssey showed. However, the Federation would upgrade its shield technology shortly before the start of the Dominion War to eliminate this weakness, reducing the Dominion's phased Palarm beams to being similarly effective to ordinary phasers or disruptors. In fact, some Jem'Hadar fighters built in the Alpha Quadrant during the Dominion War were armed with disruptors alongside or instead of their standard Palarm beam weapons. It's unknown whether this was because disruptors were more effective against Starfleet's upgraded shields, or simply because disruptors were easier to manufacture in the Alpha Quadrant, far from the Dominion's main shipyards in the Gamma Quadrant. In addition, Jem'Hadar fighters were armed with torpedo launchers, which fired torpedoes manufactured by a Gamma Quadrant species. During the Dominion War, Jem'Hadar fighters in the Alpha Quadrant were upgraded with green energy disruptors, which could completely drain target ships of power with a single hit. For a time, this weapon posed an enormous threat to the Federation and its allies, and it would have allowed the small wings of Jem'Hadar fighters to wipe out entire enemy fleets. Fortunately, the Cardassian Liberation Front was able to steal an upgraded Jem'Hadar fighter from a dry dock while the weapon was still being rolled out, allowing the Allies to reverse engineer the technology and develop countermeasures. Jem'Hadar fighters typically operated in groups, although individual fighters were occasionally seen as scouts. For smaller operations, such as patrols or attacks on easy targets, they were usually dispatched in squadrons of 3, while the Dominion usually deployed much larger target wings in larger battles. In most cases, the way the fighters operate was the same. They would pepper enemy targets with fire, usually from multiple angles, overwhelming their defenses in a relentless assault. The sheer number in which the Dominion could deploy Jem'Hadar fighters meant that these tactics were often successful. Regardless of the mission, Jem'Hadar fighters were almost always on the offensive, even against overwhelming enemy forces. They operated without regard for their own survival, and Dominion commanders wouldn't hesitate to dispatch Jem'Hadar fighters on suicide missions in order to soften up enemy forces or fulfill some other objective. Even when not directly ordered to, the crews of Jem'Hadar fighters would often carry out suicide rammings, which allowed them to easily destroy much larger ships than their weapons alone could handle. In the first Battle of Chintoka, such tactics allowed the Jem'Hadar to rapidly wipe out a squadron of 15 Klingon starships, improving the Dominion's odds in the battle. Sometimes, Jem'Hadar fighters would conduct suicide attacks without any real tactical need to, just to show their devotion to the Founders. The Dominion is believed to have started using Jem'Hadar fighters sometime in the 24th century. They deployed them in countless campaigns against people across the Gamma Quadrant, using them to conquer worlds and subjugate those who resisted the will of the Founders. The Federation was only introduced to them in 2370. However, when a squadron of 3 Jem'Hadar fighters attacked the USS Odyssey and its 2 runabout escorts, the 3 fighters easily overpowered the Odyssey with a phased Polaron beam weaponry, and one of them finished the vessel off with a suicide ram, a show of force that put the Federation on notice. Jem'Hadar fighters made regular appearances throughout the Dominion Cold War, occasionally skirmishing with vessels that came through the Bajoran wormhole. A fleet of 150 Jem'Hadar fighters completely wiped out a joint Cardassian-Romulan fleet in the Battle of Ilmaria Nebula, and a number of Starfleet vessels were suspected to have been destroyed by Jem'Hadar patrols during this time. When Cardassia officially joined the Dominion, it dispatched thousands of Jem'Hadar fighters to the Alpha Quadrant, where they secured Cardassian space, exterminated the Maquis from the neutral zone, and drove the Klingons away from several conquered Cardassian colonies. As the Dominion trenched into Cardassian space, they established shipyards that began building more Jem'Hadar fighters, greatly increasing the size of Dominion forces in the Alpha Quadrant. Throughout the Dominion War, Jem'Hadar fighters were the Dominion's main attack craft, appearing in nearly every battle of the war, from the Second Battle of Deep Space Nine to the Battle of Cardassia Prime. The Dominion deployed them by the hundreds in some major battles, and Starfleet actually made use of them on a few occasions as well. Not long prior to the war, Captain Sisko of Deep Space Nine had recovered a crashed Jem'Hadar fighter on Torgo 4, which he used to attack a key Dominion supply hub in 2374. The Cardassian Liberation Front stole a second Jem'Hadar fighter in 2375, just towards the end of the war. After the end of the Dominion War and the Dominion's complete withdrawal from the Alpha Quadrant, Jem'Hadar fighters vanished from known space, but they would remain a common sight in the Gamma Quadrant. These deadly craft remained the backbone of Dominion forces for decades following the end of the war, a symbol of the aggression and devotion of the Jem'Hadar. The Jem'Hadar fighter was introduced alongside the Jem'Hadar themselves, who were intended from the start to be an intimidating and reoccurring threat. The Dominion was meant to be a frightening enemy, and since the Jem'Hadar and its ships would be the face of the Dominion, they had to look the part. For the Jem'Hadar fighter, Deep Space Nine's writing department wanted something alien and new, without looking out of place in the Star Trek universe. At the behest of production designer Herman Zimmerman, concept artist Jim Martin went through a variety of designs while working on the Jem'Hadar fighter. Some were organic looking and claw-like, while others were aggressive, spiky, and dominated by straight lines and acute angles. Eventually, Jim Martin settled on a bug-like aesthetic for the Dominion, incorporating some Egyptian influences suggested by Rick Sternbach. Once the concept art was approved, it fell to VFX supervisor Gary Hutzel and Brazil Fabrications to transform it into a studio model. Hutzel and Brazil Fabrications tweaked the design a little over the course of this process, making formerly flat and sharp sections more rounded and bulbous. They also leaned heavily into the beetle-like elements of the ship's design, adding the glowing stripes along the craft's underside to evoke a striped abdomen. The completed studio model was also painted purple at the request of the art department, although this was toned down a little on screen. The final model produced for the Jem'Hadar fighter was deemed appropriately badass by the showrunners. In fact, the ship was considered so imposing that the US's Defiant was written into the show to provide the Federation a counterbalance to it. For its first appearance at the end of Deep Space Nine's second season, and throughout Season 3, the Jem'Hadar fighter was represented by a number of studio models, including some that were designed to be destructible for use in battle sequences. These physical models were replaced by a CGI model during the production of Season 4. This model was created by Carl Hooper of Vision Art Design and Animation, and was later rebuilt and upgraded during the production of Season 6 by Foundation Imaging's Michael Stetson. The CGI model went on to represent the Jem'Hadar fighter in the vast majority of more than 30 Deep Space Nine episodes in which it appeared. Starting things off, we have the technical details of the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser. Listed as a heavy cruiser, it was around 639.75 meters long, with a wingspan of 568.44 meters. This vessel was a major threat to the Federation during the Dominion War, with a top speed of warp 9.6, at least 5 torpedo launchers, 4 phased Polaron beams, and 3 large Polaron beams, and eventually an energy-dampening weapon from the Breen. The battlecruiser was designed to be tough, pack a punch, and survive for the glory of the Dominion. For comparison, the Galaxy-class Starship of the same era had 7 phaser arrays and a couple of torpedo launchers. The same Galaxy-class but got destroyed by 3 Jem'Hadar fighters. The primary forward weapon of the cruiser was a large launcher that sat under the vessel. It was used to fire single torpedoes, but could do multiple volleys and had a single wide sweeping arc. The Polaron ion beam-based weapons also had wide arcs, with forward emitters managing to fire up and back, as seen as the Defiant leaves Deep Space Nine in one of the many episodes. The beam itself was also capable of piercing Starfleet shields, firing directly on hull, causing immense damage, as seen in the Jem'Hadar. Eventually, the Federation did gain some resistance to the weapon, but more than a few shots continued to overwhelm the shields if concentrated on one target, as seen in the Deep Space Nine episode A Call to Arms, when Dukat orders his fleet to fire on a single section of Deep Space Nine, breaking the shields apart. Initially built by the founders to defend their borders and manned by the Jem'Hadar, the battlecruiser could house at least 2,500 soldiers, which was commanded by one Vorta and the Jem'Hadar first. The vessel was officially the more conventional backbone of the Dominion fleet. With its mid-range firepower, the vessel was considered a viable threat. Even one was considered a major threat to Deep Space Nine, a station twice its size. It made up a large portion of the invasion fleet during the first battle of Deep Space Nine and further skirmishes during the war. The battlecruiser was the main line of defense, attack, and sometimes diplomatic missions. One was even the leading cruise of Gul Dukat and Vorta Wayun, used during most of Season 5 of Deep Space Nine and the invasion from the season final. The vessel itself was barren compared to the Federation and even Cardassian counterpart, with minimal features and lack of amenities. The vessel was literally a bridge with a cargo bay that held troops. The bridge had no seats and no view screen. It was deemed unnecessary as the Jem'Hadar obeyed orders and did not need to see. The Vorta commander and the first that vessel did, however, would wear shoulder-mounted portable view screens, which allowed for them to see through the bulkhead. Dukat, Damar, Wayun, Sisko, and Gag all wore one of these at one point. However, Sisko took the brunt of the effects given off by the device, as he was given constant headaches. The vessel had some rooms on board, mainly for the Vorta to conference in, and a room dedicated solely to violent or passive interrogation. The room was visited by Jake and Nog during In the Cars, and later by Dr. Bashir when Sloane tried to convince him he was a Dominion spy. Later in the war, more Dominion battlecruisers were seen taking part in the final engagement, the Battle of Cardassia. They orbited Cardassia, ready for one final stand against the combined Federation, Romulan, and Klingon fleets. Oh, and some Cardassians. These vessels would have likely managed to break the Federation lines, costing millions of lives, had Odo not prevented the war from continuing. Ultimately, the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser was an example of a Gamma Quadrant state of affairs, while the Battleship was an example of a Dominion's commitment to a war effort in the Alpha Quadrant. Without any major reinforcements, the Dominion had to rely on its own ingenuity, as this showed in the creation of a large, more formidable battleship. First revealed and started Deep Space Nine, the Dominion battlecruiser made its grand appearance in Season 5, Episode 14, In Purgatory's Shadow. It was part of a large wave of Dominion ships gathered in a large nebula inside Dominion space. The fleet was discovered by just plain simple Garrick and Mr. Worf, who had journeyed out to find the possible lost survivors of the combined Cardassian and Romulan fleets that bombarded the Founders' homeworld in Season 3, but Dyer's cast. The fleet attacked their runabout, strangely keeping it in one piece, and then promptly transferred Worf and Garrick to internment Camp 371. The large Dominion fleet heads for the Alpha Quadrant, destroying the listening post on its way. Eventually, they pass through the wormhole, as DS9 and her crew fail to close it after receiving a scrambled warning from Worf and Garrick. This fleet heads for Cardassia, as Dukat slyly reveals that the Cardassians have joined the Dominion.
But I think you misunderstand me. I'm not attacking the Dominion fleet. I'm joining it.
As the fleet warps away, all the crew on Deep Space Nine can do is wait. This is with Dukat revealing that all Klingons and Maquis in the Cardassian space will be killed. A fleet of Klingon vessels arrives at Deep Space Nine, with their ships being forced back by the superior Dominion vessels, matching Vorta-class and Negrav-class vessels. While Bashir, Martok, Garrick, and Worf attempt to survive and escape the camp, Sisko and Gowron re-sign the Khitomer Accords, and Dukat threatens to take back all things Cardassian, including the station. After trying to lure a combined Starfleet, Klingon, and Romulan fleet to Deep Space Nine, with an imposter Bashir attempting to collapse Bajor's sun into a supernova, Dukat once more threatens to return to the station. A Dominion battlecruiser acted as a command cruiser and flagship for Wayun and Dukat, returning to the station several times. This vessel was seen docked while Dukat tried to convince Taki Kamor to return home to Cardassia after he defected to Deep Space Nine to provide information against Cardassia and her new allies. Another cruise was seen again when Jake Sisko and Nog tried to gain a special baseball card for Captain Sisko. During this, Wayun was at Deep Space Nine to sign a non-aggression pact with Bajor, and transported them aboard to ask about the connection to Dr. Geiger. They tried to tell him the truth and eventually told an elaborate lie, which Wayun did not believe and released them based on their previous story. The next time a battlecruiser is seen is during the assault on Deep Space Nine. Several are used in combined fleets of Gala-class, Hideki-class, and Jem'Hadar fighters. Dukat, Wayun, and Damar used one as their flagship, leading the primary assault on Deep Space Nine, while the crew puts up a valiant fight to defend the station, with the minefield being installed to keep Dominion forces out of the quadrant. Eventually, the crew must leave to ensure Bajor's safety and their chance to fight another day. During the start of Season 6, several battlecruisers are seen protecting Deep Space Nine, while one primarily remains docked in one of the lower pylons. When Sisko and the Defiant return to Deep Space Nine for the second battle, Dukat is brought down the minefield, forcing Sisko and his crew to face thousands of cruisers and fighters alone. In the wormhole, with the help of the Prophets, these ships are dispersed, returning in Star Trek Online to attack Deep Space Nine again. That's actually a fun mission in DS9. If it's still available, go play it. I don't know if it is though, so, good luck. As Season 6 progresses and the war worsens, the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser continues to fight valiantly, but eventually, the Dominion decides it's time to turn the tide. With no reinforcements, and the Alpha Jem'Hadar now being created for outclass Gamma Jem'Hadar, they design and build new ships, a larger ship, and this being the Battleship. We'll cover the Dominion Battleship in another video. You might agree, the bigger brother of the battlecruiser is worthy of a full video for its attention, but to give you a glimpse, this battleship featured in the Deep Space Nine episode, Valiant. The ship, while not as common as the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser, could still be seen making up various fleets. Looking at the Dominion fleet around Cardassia during the final battle, we can see these ships. Following the Treaty of Bajor, the Dominion forces returned to the Gamma Quadrant. As such, we've not seen a Jem'Hadar battlecruiser or battleship since Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Star Trek Picard featured LCAR displays of the ships. In Star Trek Online, their own story showed the Dominion updated the battlecruiser design with the turn of the 25th century. So, some behind the scenes information for all of you. As Deep Space Nine moved gradually towards an all-out war between the Federation and the Dominion, it was decided that a more menacing ship was required for a war footing. While the Jem'Hadar fighter had been a valiant vessel, destroying a Galaxy-class starship, it became more evident that a larger vessel would be needed to build out the Dominion fleet, one that generally emphasized the threat the Dominion posed. Initially, the tiny bug-like Dominion fighter had been designed by Jim Martin, a production illustrator. However, he had unfortunately left the show by the time a new designer was required. The task of the new Jem'Hadar cruiser came down to John Eves. John Eves worked as a studio model maker on Star Trek's The Final Frontier and had worked with the franchise since the late 1980s. This would be the second ship Eves had ever designed, and while he was mindful of a previous smaller fighter, he wanted to make sure the new ship, while maintaining the design language, was unique enough to carry itself. For inspiration, Eves took to old military jet fighters, particularly the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. He mostly took design aspects from the cruciform style tail and the low-mounted delta wing, which influenced the elevated structure of the rear. He saw the larger the structures of the warp engines, while the smaller ones with the impulse engines and thrusters. An interesting fact, which this writer did not know, is that a larger sweeping shapes on the bottom of the wings were not actually warp nacelles, they were fuel storage pods. According to John Eves, the original design of a Jem'Hadar cruiser was meant for potentially another alien species. Yet when Dan Curry saw it, he decided that this was a design choice for the Jem'Hadar. Eves thinks this may be down to Curry having a thing for knives and blades, which would make sense as he did design the Klingon bat'leth. When designing the ship, John Eves produced three-quarter design. He felt this was the fastest way to showcase the new design, and this showed as the design was quickly approved. Eves was then tasked with designing more plans of the vessel, focusing on the fore, aft, side, ventral, and dorsal views. This was so the special effects house, Vision Art, could create a CG model while Don Pennington built the physical model. Unlike some ships in Deep Space Nine, the Dominion cruiser was built from fiberglass, resulting in a 48-inch by 48-inch model weighing a ton. The model required 3 or 4 people to lift it and turn it for all the shots required. While it was a beautiful model, the production crew did end up affectionately calling it the Lead Hadar. This vessel marked the penultimate physical model to be built, and it appeared in the Season 5 episodes In Purgatory's Shadow, and then again in Sacrifice of the Angels, as stock footage. The CGI model of the battlecruiser also appeared in Season 5's In Purgatory's Shadow, several of which pursued Garak and Worf's runabout. Surprisingly, there were actually 2 models of the battlecruiser for CGI, which led many to believe there were 2 variations of the ship. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The CG model had slightly steeper wings, which was due to a misinterpretation of John Eves' sketch. A new CG model was created by Foundation Imaging, in which they had access to the physical model when building the CG one. This resulted in a perfect match between CG model and model starships. The vessel blended the perfect aesthetics between menacing and sleek, making it the menacing yet alluring enemy to go head-to-head with the Federation. Shortly after the outbreak of the Dominion War, the Dominion introduced the Jem'Hadar battleship to their fleets. While similar in design to the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser, the battleship was notably larger and more heavily armed. Initial intelligence by Starfleet indicated that this vessel design was twice the size of a Federation Galaxy-class starship, but 3 times as powerful as the design. While only observed at a speed of warp 4.7, it is possible the Jem'Hadar battleship was capable of greater speeds. Due to limited information, only 10+ torpedo launchers have been observed in use by this vessel design. It was defended by deflector shields that were capable of withstanding an attack from multiple Federation starships, including the weapons of a Defiant-class vessel. Due to the Dominion War raging on, Starfleet dispatched the USS Valiant on stardate 51825 to conduct intelligence gathering on a supposed new Dominion warship operating in a particular sector. The Valiant was able to spend 3 hours collecting data on the new vessel. determining that it was a direct threat to every Federation outpost and colony within 50 light years. The Valiant crew determined it had to be destroyed. Before this took place, the USS Valiant had been operating in the Kepler sector when the Dominion War began. The Valiant had actually been a training vessel used by elite Starfleet Academy cadets of Red Squad. After encountering a Cardassian battlecruiser, all 7 of the regular Starfleet officers were killed in action. This left the cadets in charge of the Valiant, which was operating under radio silence. Due to this radio silence, Starfleet Command were unaware of the deaths of the Starfleet officers. Cadet Tim Waters, who was appointed as captain, decided to take on the mission. After rescuing Ensign Nog and Jake Sisko from a Starfleet runabout, the Valiant was repaired and able to catch up to the elusive Dominion battleship. More intelligence was gathered on the ship, and a supposed weakness in the vessel's design was identified. Data collected suggests that the primary support braces for the antimatter storage system of the battleship were constructed from a material known as Vitarium. This meant the braces were prone to destabilization when exposed to delta radiation. Rather than returning valuable intelligence to Starfleet Command, Captain Waters was overconfident and attempted to destroy the Dominion battleship. To do this, the crew of the Valiant attempted to exploit the flaw they thought they'd observed. The Defiant-class Valiant went into battle against the Jem'Hadar battleship and took damage while attempting to complete the mission. While able to secure a direct hit and cause damage to the battleship, the Valiant was vastly outgunned and took significant damage. Captain Waters and 7 of the bridge crew were killed in the attack. Ensign Nog, Jake Sisko, and Cadet Dorian Collins were able to escape the doomed Valiant by escape pods. They were later rescued by the sister ship, USS Defiant. Out of a crew of 35, plus Ensign Nog and Jake Sisko, only 3 survived the battle. Only one of the 3 was actually one of the Valiant's original crew. Following this engagement, the Dominion seemingly had deployed more Jem'Hadar battleships. One was recorded as being used in the assault of a Cardassian rebellion base in late 2375. Several ships were later seen participating in the Battle of Cardassia. They were later seen orbiting Cardassia Prime. In the 25th century, the Jem'Hadar battleship would still be in service. This is seen in the Star Trek Online MMO, where the vessel is referred to as the Dominion Dreadnought. The actual size of the Jem'Hadar battleship is a bit of a debate. In the Deep Space Nine episode, Valiant, which is also where we first see the battleship, it's implied it's 1,284 meters long, which is further supported by the close-range engagement by the USS Valiant. The vessel is sized up in the final Battle of Cardassia. During this battle in the series finale, the Dominion battlecruiser is scaled several times larger than in previous episodes. Of course, the Deep Space Nine episode, Valiant, called for shots of the Defiant class, Valiant, making strafing shots on the Jem'Hadar battleship, taking it extremely close to the surface of the enemy vessel. Because current models were not up to the task, a new CGI model had to be built. Star Trek veteran John Eaves took the task of designing the Dominion battleship. Eaves designed the battleship along the same design lineage as the Jem'Hadar battlecruiser, which had already been seen on the series. Due to the close resemblance of the two designs, it often confuses them with each other. With the design having its final approval, Digital Muse was contracted to build the CG model. The company would add extra detail, texture, and surfacing needed for the Valiant episode. As of now, the Jem'Hadar battleship is the least seen Jem'Hadar design, only appearing in 3 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Would you like to have seen more of this formidable ship? Red alert! For Star Trek starships, action figures, and collectibles, check out our partner site, the Cargo Bay, now docked and ready. You'll find several of the starships featured in today's video available on the Cargo Bay's website. Hit the link in the description and explore. So, that is the Dominion fleet in the Star Trek universe. Surprisingly, there are only 3 main ships used in the Dominion War by the Dominion. But of course, the Dominion fleet was backed up by the Cardassian Gala-class, Keldon-class, and Hideki-class starships, and eventually the Breen. You can check out our overview of those starships, including the Cardassian and the Breen, here on the Trek Central channel. As mentioned, your support on the development of Trek Central's videos is greatly appreciated. Please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy-class rewards. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.